played over 100 hours at low stakes this year, and I've noticed something that's going to cost a lot of players money. I keep getting called in spots where a few years ago I get folds almost every single time, and I can already hear the comment section.
Mark, you put hundreds of hours of yourself bluffing on YouTube. Of course they're not folding to you.
I thought that too. Then I started looking at hands I wasn't even in, not only at the table, but hands our 600 plus students played from all over the world. And here's the scary part. The same thing is happening. Players are calling way more than they used to. The pool that learned to fold 5 to 10 years ago, now they're getting curious again. So today, I'm gonna show you the 3 adjustments you need to make, where you should be sizing way up for value, where the big boy bluffs are no longer getting through, and the small tweaks you need to make to turn those big boy bluffs profitable once again. The pool has shifted. The only question is whether you stay one step ahead or get left behind. All right, the first spot where I believe you should be sizing up for value, where your opponents are capped, but still inelastic. So let me show you. All right, so we're gonna open King 10 of clubs here on the button. The big blind is going to defend. We are going to c-bet, and our opponent is going to call. We make second pair here on the turn, so we've got somewhere between thin value and showdown value, so we're gonna check this back. We've got a 2-street hand now. No reason to turn this into a bluff. We've got plenty of sufficient showdown value, but if we just go bet, 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 we're really only getting called by worse here. So we're gonna check this back and try to play a 2-street game. Now the river is a queen pairing the board, and our opponent comes out and checks. Let's think about our opponent's range carefully in this spot. First, they're probably not gonna have many boats here, because if they did have a hand like pocket 6s, pocket 5s, queen 6 suited, something like that, they're going to check raise at a high frequency on the flop when the board is wet and dynamic and we choose a small size. Second of all, unless they're the most passive patty in the world, they're probably not going to have quite as many missed draws here, because when we show passivity, when we check back on the turn, a lot of players, even ones that aren't the most aggressive players in the pool, are just going to come out and bluff here if they have a missed draw, like 7, 8, 8, 9, a bricked spade draw, something like that. If they have missed draws here, a lot of times after we check back the turn, we give them rope, we give them the green light, they're just going to come out and bluff. Finally, they're not going to have a ton of queen X here, and why do I think that? I'm not saying they never have queen X here. I'm just saying they're not going to have a ton of it, because in general, once we check back the turn, they're going to get a little bit greedy with the queen X on the river. They just want to come out and bet, because it looks like this river could go check, check. They've waited all day to make trips. They're not going to let this go check, check. They're going to try to get value right here, right now, when they do make trips on this river. The one hand that they do trap with on this river, again, is kind of the invulnerable super nuts going for the check raise. Hands like pocket 5s, pocket 6s, whatever, they're full houses, those sometimes trap and go for the check raise. But remember, in general, we just don't think they have many of those hands, because those would mostly raise on the flop. So what do they have on this river if they don't really have a ton of queen X? They don't have a bunch of bricked draws once they check here on the river. They don't really have boats. So what do they have? They're going to have showdown value. They're going to have hands like 6X, 5X, pocket 7s, pocket 8s. They're going to have a ton of that stuff on this river. And this is the spot where I see opponents get very, very sticky in spots like this, where the pot is small and they are capped, meaning they're not going to have the strongest hands, but they're still going to be inelastic, meaning they're going to be price insensitive. They don't care if we bet small, medium, or large here. They are checking on this river, planning to check call, because we check back the turn, the pot is still small, they have a hand that has showdown value and wants to play a 2-street game. They're going to get to play a 2-street game here. So I just think if our opponent flips over a hand like ace 6 here, or pocket 8s or something like that, they are just not folding even to a big size. So this is a spot that I'm starting to really size up and go for the overbet for value, maybe 1.5x, 2x pot. And you notice here we only have king 10, right? We only have king 10. I just think we're going to be ahead here 90+% of the time. And I think when our opponent does have hands like 5x, 6x, pocket 7s, 8s, 9s, etc., they're just never folding here, even for an overbet. This is a spot that I would feel really, really bad bluffing, trying to get our opponent to fold a hand like pocket 8s. So therefore, when we do have value in the spot, well, even when we have thin value, we just want to size way up, because we don't think our opponents are going to be folding in the spot. So just size way up when we got value here. All right, next spot I'm just sizing to the moon when I have value is queen high boards, specifically in 3-bet pots. So let me show you. Cutoff opens, we're going to 3-bet on the button. We flop top pair, we're going to c-bet small, our opponent calls, get to the turn, and at this point I am just trying to set up a favorable SPR to get in all the money by the river here. On this turn, our opponent's going to have a lot of inelastic hands like 10-9 suited, ace X of hearts, queen jack, queen 10, queen 9 suited. They're just going to have a ton of hands here on the turn that are just going to call a very big bet. So we go 250 250. Could even argue for maybe even going 300 here. Our opponent's going to put in the call. We go to a river, which is a very, very nice card for us, pairing the board. And I find on these bottom card pairing rivers, our opponents actually do get more sticky. So this is just another bonus on top of this. This is a spot where I just really wouldn't be running the big boy bluff in a 3-bet pot. If we had a hand like Jack 10 that bricked on this river, would not feel comfortable running it. Now, it doesn't mean I would give up. I may choose a small bluff size, just trying to get our opponents to fold hands like ace X of hearts or something like that if we had 10-9 here, but I would not feel comfortable going all in, because in a 3-bet pot on a queen high board, when the board pairs on the river, our opponents in general, what hands do they put us on all the time in a 3-bet pot?
Well, I put you on ace king.
They just don't like to fold in the spot, and I've learned the hard way. So the adjustment here is when we do have thin value, when we have a hand like king queen, we need to be putting all the money in, and it can be a little scary. And I'm going to give you a caveat here. Sometimes we're going to get snapped off by a better hand. Sometimes our opponent is going to have ace queen in the spot, and we're going to lose all the money. That's okay if our opponents are never folding queen jack, queen 10, queen 9 suited. Sometimes they may even snap you off here with pocket jacks or pocket 10s. And if our opponents are calling not much, that means this is going to be a very, very profitable spot to go 3 streets for value, just using this big all-in size on the river. All right, next spot where I am sizing up with my value is on these static dry boards. Let me show you. This time, button is going to open. We're going to defend in big blind with ace 10. We flop top pair, and the button checks it back. Now the turn is a queen of spades, bringing a backdoor flush draw. And I think a big mistake I see a lot of players make on a turn like this is just coming out and choosing a size like $20, $30, something like that. And the reason why I think this is a massive mistake is because on these ace high boards, when our opponent is the pre-flop raiser, their range is still going to have quite a lot of top pair. This is the one type of board where even recreational players will often check back top pair on the static dry board. Static meaning the nuts are unlikely to change on the turn. Dry meaning not a lot of draws out there. The reason why they do check back hands like ace 5 suited, ace 4, ace 7, whatever, is because they feel like they have a 2-street hand, but they're just not scared of bad cards coming in, of an overcard coming in, of a flush coming in, of a straight coming in, whatever. It's going to just make their hand shrivel up in value. They're just not scared of that type of thing happening like they would be on a jack 9 deuce 2-tone board. So I find in this situation, our opponents are going to have a ton of ace X. They're also going to have some showdown value, right? Hands like king high, hands like pocket 4s, whatever. And I would say those hands, even if we breathe on this pot, even if we bet 20, even if we bet $15 on this turn, right? Those hands are folding no matter what. But the ace X that we beat, the ace 3, ace 4, ace 5, ace 7, all these hands that do check back, they're not folding even for a large size. So I find this a really good spot to go big here on the turn, get our opponents to call, and then on the river, go big once again. I like to go overbet in this spot just because our opponents are not planning on folding hands like ace 5 suited that they checked back on the flop. And this is the one board where they will check back top pair at a reasonable frequency. So overbet, we're going to get called and we are going to win. All right, next spot where I'm sizing up for value. We kind of touched on this before, but the board pairing rivers, really, really good spot where our opponents do get much more sticky. So we're going to 3-bet with Quigley's. Our opponent's going to call. We c-bet. We're going to double barrel here on this turn. And now the board pairing river. I see so many players in this spot just kind of shut down. Like,
What if my opponent has trips?
Okay, so sometimes you get stacked, right? It's okay. The world isn't going to end if we get stacked once in a while, if we get value owned, right? But what about when our opponent has hands like ace 10, jack 10, queen 10? What about when they have hands like pocket jacks in this spot? Those hands just aren't folding at any reasonable frequency in a 3-bet pot, right? If our opponent flipped over jacks or ace 10 here and you said, Mark, you got to make this guy fold, and you put a gun to my head, I'm saying, you know what? You may as well pull the trigger, because even for $1,100 on this river, I don't think this guy's folding. So therefore, when we do have queens in the spot, when we do have an overpair, this is an amazing spot to just overbet, put in all the money on the river. And sure, sometimes we're going to get value owned, but that is okay if the majority of the time we are going to get called by worse. And I believe our opponents just really aren't folding 10x or certainly pocket jacks in this spot. So a really nice spot to just put in all the money with pocket queens here on these board pairing rivers. rivers. All right, next spot where I am sizing way up for value. This one is sauce, guys. I'm gonna show you. So under the gun opens, we're going to defend on the button. The button, the one place where I will have some flats pre-flop. Normally like to play 3-better folds, specifically against recreational players, but against the early position open, can do some flatting on the button here, particularly with hands that are going to play well multi-way. And this hand is a lot of sauce, I'm going to warn you. Normally, I save stuff like this for Basecamp. Basecamp, by the way, is our 5-day coaching program. And this is not based on passive learning, right? It's not about memorizing charts or giving you a bunch of solver outputs. And I hear so often our students say, before I found Hungry Horse, you know, I was looking at solvers, I was trying to memorize pre-flop charts, and like none of this stuff was actually applying to the games I'm in. What we do during Basecamp is we give you the system we built. If you guys aren't familiar, Hungry Horse, we started as a stable, backing 25 players all over the world with our own money. And if those players won, well, we got a percentage of their profits. And if they lost, well, we took 100% of the downside. So our incentive was to build them the best strategy that would make them the most amount of money. And the first strategy guide we built them was a 117-page guide for out of position. We were so proud of it. We were so excited to give this to them. And then we had our Zoom call with our stable of 25 players. I'm presenting this 117-page manifesto for playing out of position. I'm so proud of it. And all I see is just a bunch of blank faces. And mind you, these were all players who were playing 5-10, 10-20, 20-40, whatever. They were all playing for a living and all playing mid to high stakes, and none of them used it at all. And at that point, that's when we realized we can't just give players more information. We need to give them stuff that they can actually apply in their game. So we completely changed at that point how we were teaching our stable of players. And instead of giving them more information, we started teaching them the why behind the strategy. And that's when everything clicked. Now, we no longer run a stable because we realized after some time it was not a great business model. But we learned some very important lessons. And in my biased opinion, that's why our students get such incredible results today, because we teach them the why instead of just giving them more information. So that's kind of what the 5-day Basecamp is about, teaching you the why behind strategies that actually apply to the players you're playing against every day. And then we don't just leave you in the dust after those 5 days. No, we give you 2 months of complimentary support with twice weekly live coaching calls. So overall, you're not just going to get 5 days, you're going to get 2 full months of coaching calls, plus curated study groups. You're going to get hand history feedback from myself, Gethen, our team of coaches, etc. If any of this sounds interesting at all to you, check out our 5-day Basecamp. All right, anyway, so we are going to see a flop after the undergun player opens and we call on the button. We flop the nut flush draw, and the pre-flop raiser now comes out and bets nearly pot here. This is one of those spots where I just really wouldn't be raising as a semi-bluff almost at all, unless I had a massive combo draw. I just don't think we have a lot of fold equity here. I like to talk about the yin and the yang between equity in our own hand and fold equity. And ideally, when we are running those big boy bluffs, we want both of those, right? We want equity in our own hand and we want a lot of fold equity, meaning we think we can get our opponents to fold a lot by the river. This spot, well, we have a decent amount of equity in our own hand, right? But our fold equity is through the floor. We're just not going to have any fold equity here. After our opponent opens from under the gun and then nearly pots it on a king high flop, this is just going to be weighted towards strong hands. Now, I'm not saying this is always strong hands. I'm just saying it's probably weighted too heavily towards strong hands. So this would not be a spot I would be raising. Really, the only hands as kind of a semi bluff I would be raising here are maybe our big combo draws. That's pretty much it in this spot. And then if we do have value here, if we have a hand like pocket fours or king jack, I'm just raising all the time because I'm not expecting our opponent to fold a lot of their hands that just pot it on this flop. So we're going to call. We pick up a pair on the turn. Our opponent's going to double barrel again for a big size. And we're just going to call for the same reason here. We're just trying to realize against this opponent. Now the river is an 8 and our opponent checks it over. And in general, I've talked about this before. When recreational players bet the flop, especially for a big size, and then bet the turn and check the river, it is a way different range. It's a way different action than when a reg or a pro does this in general, because recreational players don't double barrel nearly enough as a bluff, especially when they choose a big turn sizing. So when they double barrel for a large size, they're just going to be very, very heavily weighted towards value. The other thing about recreational players is they don't value bet the river nearly thinly enough. So getting to this river after going bet, bet, check, they underbluff the turn, which means they're going to be weighted towards value. Now they check the river and they don't value bet thinly enough. So what type of hands are they going to have here on this river representing the majority of the range? It's going to be a lot of value hands, right? This is just going to be hands like ace, king, king, queen, pocket aces, king, jack at a very, very high frequency, guys. And sure, I'll hear someone say in the comments here,
oh, well, what if you run into pocket jacks sometimes?
so what? Right? Who cares, right? It is okay to get stacked sometimes, guys. Here's what happens when you get stacked. You say, nice hand, you reach into your pocket, you pull out another stack of chips and you put them on the table and you continue playing. It's okay to get stacked sometimes because the majority of the time here, if we put money in on this river, we are going to get called by worse. So long term, it is going to be a very profitable play. Now, in this spot, the question I would be asking, if I did get to this river with a hand like queen high, what size would I go to get my opponent to fold a hand like ace king or king jack or pocket aces on this river? And I'm not sure there is a size to get that done when we have not taken the lead, when we have not shown any aggressive action the whole hand. In general, when I'm trying to get my opponents to fold, I want to tell them very loudly twice, excuse me, sir, I have the best hand. No. I'm not kidding. I definitely have the best hand, right? I want to show them through either a raise and then a bet or a check raise and a jam. I want to show them through two aggressive actions, right? To be able to maximize fold equity that I have a strong hand. In this spot, even though we have a ton of money behind, I wouldn't expect our opponent to fold a hand like pocket aces, even if we put all the money in. So what does that mean we should do here in this spot when our opponent checks it over? That is right. We should be using this big boy all-in sizing because our opponent's range is so strong. I'm just not expecting them to fold. And you may be thinking, well, Mark, what if they just have a brick draw here? What if they just have queen 10 and they're just giving up? Well, queen 10's not going to call anything anyway, so who cares? We're not concerned about queen 10. We're concerned about the times that they do have hands like aces, ace, king, king, jack here, and we want to make sure we win the max against those hands. So this is a spot that I am sizing way up for value. All right, next spot I am sizing up is the spots where opponents are going to think that we have either the nuts or nothing, and these generally tend to be 4 to a straight or 4 to a flush type situation. So let me show you. We're going to open king 3. We flop an open ender. We're going to c-bet, and the turn is a blank. We believe our opponent is capped, but they are inelastic, meaning they're going to have a ton of hands. They're going to call a big bet here, but they're strong hands. They're super strong hands like ace 3, pocket 4s, pocket deuces. Most of these would just raise on the flop. They do have a ton of hands here. Hands like 5-6, hands like 4-3 suited, hands like pocket 8s that just aren't going to care. Even if we bet big, all of those hands are going to continue. So we're going to go big here because the best bluff is the bluff where they call the flop, call the turn, and put in the most amount of money possible, and then fold the river. So that's going to be the plan, but look, we get there on the river. We make the straight. This is one of those spots where I'm noticing when there's 4 to a straight out there, when there's 4 to a flush out there, opponents in general are starting to get sticky in this spot, and I think the reason is they're thinking, oh my god, in this spot you either have a straight or nothing. So when we do have a straight here, I like to go egregiously large. And even if we did have a hand like pocket 5s or something like that, I may still find the really big size on this river because I think our opponents are going to snap us off with worse a high percentage of the time. This is one of those spots where if our opponent flips over a hand like ace 10 of clubs or something like that, I just don't think they're folding. Now, there are some players where that is not true, and against those players, what do? Well, we size down with value and we size up with our bluffs, right? Really easy adjustment. But against the pool, I'm finding in this spot when they have a hand like ace X of clubs, right? And they can have a ton of 2 pair in this spot as well. They can have ace 4 suited, ace deuce suited, ace 5 suited, ace 9 suited, right? They can just have some pretty strong hands getting to this river. And this is one of those spots I find where if I was bluffing here, I would not feel good about putting all the money in because I think our opponents are going to get sticky with hands that are worse than straights, right? If our opponents were only calling with straights here on this river and we get here with a bluff, we get here with an airball, well, I'm just putting in the money all the time, and if we get called by a straight, whatever. But I think our opponents are calling with way more than straights here, right? I think they're calling with ace X of clubs. I think they have a bunch of 2 pair. I think sometimes in the spot I'm seeing players call with even weaker than that, right? With hands like 5X in the spot because they just don't believe you. This is a spot where I'm not comfortable using that big boy bluff size. So what does that mean? When we have value, very good spot to just put all of the money in. All right, so we've talked about good spots to size up for value where I think opponents are probably just starting to underfold. Now I want to show you the inverse. I want to show you the spots where I believe just the big boy bluffs are no longer printing. And then I'm going to show you for each spot one small tweak I may make to turn that big boy bluff back into a profitable situation. So let's jump back in. All right, the first spot where the big boy bluffs are no longer profitable is against opponents who are starting to trap a little bit more. And I've heard a lot of players talk about this saying, hey, Mark, what do I do against guys who won't raise the strong stuff, right? So let's talk about that. Let me show you an example. So we're against a player in the big blind here. We are going to c-bet, and this guy is just going to call. And this may be a player who, at least for one street, even on a wet dynamic board, may just trap with a hand like pocket sevens or pocket threes, right? You know this type of player, the guy who's always going to spring the trap, at least for one street, even when the board is a little scary, right? They're going to be on the trippy, trappy side, more like a Phil Hellmuth type donkey. So in this spot, what do we do on the turn? Well, in general, you guys know when our opponents are capped and inelastic on the turn, I like to size way up. The problem is here, if our opponents still do have hands like sevens, threes, 10-7 getting to this turn, when we choose the overbet size, they're going to be way less inclined to start check raising, and they may just trap again. We go to a blank river and we're like, well, our opponents are capped now on this river, but they're not, because they still have those super strong hands that they trapped with on the flop. Remember, we're against a super tricky, trappy player here, and when we run it in this spot, we just get snapped off by a hand like sevens or threes or 10-7 or something like that. And then we're like, oh my God, Mark told me to put in all the money and it didn't work. I'm gonna find this guy and I'm gonna bite off his ears. So here's the adjustment I may make, right? We're still gonna c-bet on the flop. And now on the turn, when the turn is a blank, against trappy players, I like to size down one more time. Choose a 30%, 40% pot size bet on the turn. And what this does is, even against the trickiest, trappiest players, once you choose a small size on the turn, one of two things happen. They start thinking,
oh my God, he bet small on the turn. I need to put in more money right now. I've waited 6 hours to finally flop a set. I can't let this go to waste.
Or they start thinking,
oh my God, he bet small. I don't want the river to go check, so I'm just gonna call, but then I'm gonna lead on the river.
See, either way, when you choose this small size on the turn, you dramatically increase the odds that your opponent is going to fast play their super strong hands by the river. So they either start check raising right here, right now on the turn, because you've gone small again, or they just come out and donk. They just lead on the river and completely let you off the hook. And a big clue here, the sizing they choose after you go small on the turn is usually going to be large if they're going to come out and lead on the river, because they've waited all day to flop a set. They get greedy. They want to make money from the strong hand they've waited 6 hours for. But when they just check call on the turn to a small size, and now they check on the river, well, shit. In this spot, all of a sudden, we now have that green light again to get our opponent to fold everything, because we think at a very high frequency, they'd start check raising on the turn when they have hands like two pair and sets. So now, getting to this river, we can just run the big boy bluff in a very profitable spot again, because even though we were unsuccessful in capping our opponent on the flop, we now chose the small size again on the turn because they are trappy, they do have strong hands, and now they are capped again getting to the river. We just need to be a little bit more patient in capping these tricky, trappy players. All right, the next spot where the big boy bluffs aren't quite as profitable, same tricky, trappy player, but now the turn is a nut changing card. So in this spot, I see a lot of players go small. They're like, you know, Mark told me when the nuts change on the turn, let's go small. Let's choose the small size here. And this will force our opponents to raise with their flushes. And then we go to the river, and then we can just empty the clip. And this seems good, right? Well, here's the error in the logic. If this opponent is tricky and trappy, what are they going to do on the flop with their sets and two pair? Well, they're going to just call a lot. And now the flush comes in on the turn. They were planning to spring the trap and check raise on the turn, but now the flushes come in. So even if we choose a small size, a lot of times on this turn, they have a set, they have two pair that they flop. They're not going to raise because now they're terrified of the flush. So the problem is going small again. Sure, we get them to raise their flushes sometimes, but they're still going to have two pair and sets getting to the river, and they're not planning on folding those anytime soon. So even when we put in a lot of money, we're still getting snapped off here by hands like pocket sevens, pocket threes, 10-7, etc. So my adjustment in the spot on the turn, when we have just air here, when we have a low equity draw, I'm just checking back. Because what happens when we check back on the river? If our opponent does have a flush, what are they going to do after we check back the turn? They're just going to come out and bet at a high frequency. If our opponent even has a hand like pocket sevens, pocket threes, right after we check back the turn, they're going to think,
oh, he doesn't have a flush. I can bet here.
Even more passive players are still going to come out and try to get value from their sets or two pair after we check back the turn, right? Because the pot is still small. So they're going to come out and bet with a high frequency on this river when they have a flush, when they have a set, bet. So if they come out and bet on the river, we have an easy decision. We just fold. We just get out of the way. But the really cool part happens when our opponent checks on this river. And now what is our opponent's range when they check? Well, they're probably just going to come out and bet their sets and their flushes at a relatively high frequency. Not always, but at a high frequency. So what's the range going to be on this river? It's going to be a lot of hands like 7x. It's going to be some hands like 8s, 9s, maybe some 10x. And I feel much more comfortable with bluffing that range than I do with bluffing a range that includes sets and 2 pairs. So the way to start making this big boy bluff profitable again on these nut changing turns against tricky trappy players is just check back on the nut changing turns, see what they do on the river. They're going to give you some more information about the range, and then we can use that information to our advantage, turning this unprofitable bluff spot into a very profitable one once again. All right, next spot that I'm finding unprofitable to run the big boy bluffs is these top card pairing rivers. So let's say we 3-bet here, cut off first hijack, we're gonna c-bet with our gutter, we're gonna double barrel on the turn, we get to a river, top card pairs on the river. And I see so many players in this spot just like,
well, Mark just always says go all in, when we don't have bluff big on the river.
and that is preposterous. It is so incorrect. They don't understand what is going on, but you guys know better because you're watching this video, you're going to pick up all the nuance, all the details. What is our opponent's range after they call the 3-bet, check call the flop, check call the turn, check call the river? What is their range going to be? It's going to be a lot of king X, which makes trips, and it's going to be some busted draws. And even if we put all the money in, we take off our AP or our paddock, put it on the table, we put our Bentley keys on the table, our opponent is not folding trips in this spot, right? But if our opponent does have a busted flush draw, if they have ace X of spades, if they have queen X of spades, jack X of spades, right? How much does it take to get that hand to fold? And I would posit that it's not that much money to get that hand to fold. So we can just go with a very small size instead of the big boy bluff on this river. And this small size, I believe, when we have a hand like 10 high, jack high, is going to absolutely print, because sure, we're going to get snapped off by king X a lot of the time, but we don't need this bluff to work all that often for it to be profitable. All we really need for this bluff to succeed is our opponent to fold ace X, queen X, jack X of spades, and we are absolutely going to print in this spot. So the key here on these board pairing rivers, specifically in 3-bet pots, find a different bluff size, right? We don't need to always use a jackhammer when sometimes the scalpel will get the job done way better, way more precise, right? We're going for brain surgery here. You don't want to go with the jackhammer into the brain. I don't know where this metaphor is going, but I'm going to keep running with it. Small on this river, guys. That's where to go. All right, next bluff spot that is unprofitable. I'm going to show you the secret. I'm going to show you the secret to turn this around, but it is on these static dry boards. So let's say we open, flop is ace 7 deuce, and here's the reason why I don't just love c-betting on these boards, because what happens when we go 25? Well, all the opponents, not just trappy opponents, even aggressive opponents may sometimes get trappy on this particular board because the board is so static, so dry, they just don't really have much to worry about. Our opponents may trap hands like 7s, deuces, ace 7, etc. And so getting to the turn, right, our opponent is not going to be capped in inelastic. So we choose this big size, and what happens again if our opponent has a super strong hand when we overbet? Well, they're going to slow play more. The bigger the size we choose, the more they slow play. The smaller the size we choose, the less they slow play. So if we choose this massive size here on the turn, our opponent may just flat once again with pocket 7s. We get to the river and we're like, well, we need to get our opponent to fold the ace X, so let's put all the money in. But the problem is, so often on this river, we're going to run into ace 7, ace deuce, pocket 7s, pocket deuces, 7 6, ace jack, right? We're just going to run into a brick wall so damn much. And you may be thinking, well, why don't we just go small on the turn? Because if we go small one more time, what's our opponent going to do with hands like 7s, deuces, ace 7? Most of the time, they're going to start raising right now if they didn't raise on the flop. We talked about that before. We give our opponent 2 chances to start raising their strong hands. And even if the board is static and dry, even if our opponents are trappy, they often start taking the bait, right? They're going to start raising. The problem is when they call here, their range is still just going to have a lot of ace X. And now the pot is very small. And if we were trying to get our opponent to fold a hand like ace 10 or ace 8 on this river, what size do we need to go? Well, we need to go absolutely massive. We need to go something like 2x pot, maybe, to get our opponent to fold top pair here. And the problem is, when we start going 2x pot, what's going to happen on the river? Well, we're just going to run into ace jack a bunch, right? We're going to occasionally run into a hand like ace queen or ace king that a passive opponent just flatted from the big blind, and those hands aren't folding. So the problem is this bluff just, in my opinion, isn't going to be that profitable, because they're going to have some good top pair here that just doesn't fold. They're going to have some 2 pair here they bank on the river that just doesn't fold. And sure, sometimes we get the fold folds from ace 9, ace 5, ace 4, whatever, but I don't think this is working enough to really make this bluff profitable. So what is my adjustment in this spot? It's a very similar adjustment we talked about before, where we were checking back on the turn when our opponent was uncapped and inelastic. And on these flops, even if we c-bet, our opponents are still going to be uncapped. They're not going to fast play all that often, even to a small size, and they're going to be inelastic with ace-x, right? So we can't really cap them. They're going to be inelastic on turns, right? So in these situations, what do I do on the flop? I just check back. Just checking back with the majority of my range here. And then what's going to happen on the turn is our opponent is just going to be face up. They're going to tell us what they have quite often, not all the time. Not 100% of the time, but that's okay. A large percentage of the time, if our opponent has a hand like ace queen, ace jack, pocket sevens, they're just gonna come out and bet for a big size. So what does that mean when they check here on the turn? Well, sure, they could still be trapping occasionally, right? But it's not gonna be at a high frequency, because after we check back the flop, they're gonna wanna start putting money in with their damn good hands, right? So what does that mean? Their range is just going to be weaker. Doesn't mean it's always going to be weak, but it is going to be weaker, which is going to increase the profitability of our bluff here on this turn, right? Because now what we can do here on this turn, we can start choosing this big boy size, because they may check a weak ace-x hand one more time. They may check a hand like pocket nines one more time, something like that. They're not folding even for a big bet here. We've reduced the combos of strong hands in our opponent's range after they check the turn, after the flop goes check, check. So now we're gonna have a much more profitable bluff on this river, because we're not gonna run into ace queen, ace king, ace jack at nearly as high of a frequency here. So this is going to massively increase the EV of our big boy bluff on the river. All right, next spot, and I see so many players just not take this into account when the SPR is low. So let me show you. We start this hand only 600 effective, jack 9 deuce. Look at that sweet baby there. We're gonna c-bet, our opponent is going to call, we're gonna overbet on the turn, and I see so many players just run it in this spot, and the problem is we just don't have enough stack depth behind to get our opponent to fold top pair. I hear a lot of players say, Mark, in my games, players don't fold top pair. And I'm like, well, okay, like if you're starting the hand 125 big blinds effective, of course they don't fold top pair. If you're choosing a pot size on the river, of course they don't fold top pair, right? We need those 2x, 3x pot size bets on the river to get our opponent to start considering folding top pair. And if we start the hand 125 big blinds effective, this bluff is just going to light money on fire, guys. We're going to get snapped off here by Jack X 96.438% of the time. So a couple options here to turn this bluff back into the green again. We could still choose this big boy size on the turn, but now on the river, we don't target Jack X to fold. We just target the draws. We choose the smaller size. We've talked about this before. Use the scalpel instead of the jackhammer. The other option, guys, is to sculpt the SPR a little bit better. Maybe we choose a slightly smaller size on the turn, and we keep the range a little bit wider and a little bit weaker. Maybe if we choose a smaller size, we keep the 9x in there. We keep the pocket 8s in there. We keep the pocket 10s in there. We keep their range a little bit weaker getting to the river. And now on the river, maybe we choose a medium size on the river. We're never trying to get Jack X to fold, but because we kept the range a little bit wider, a little bit weaker, now we can get hands like 9x, pocket 8s, on top of getting all their draws to fold. So still a couple of options we can use here that start to make this bluff more profitable. Number one, we still choose the big boy size on the turn, but we go small on the river. Number two, we size down on the turn, and then we size down on the river, just trying to keep their range a little bit wider, a little bit weaker. Again, we're not trying to get top pair to fold at this SPR. These are two options to start turning this bluff from the red back to the green. All right, next spot, the big boy bluff is going to be a punt. Is on these nut changing rivers. So let me show you. We're gonna c-bet here with an open ender. We're gonna overbet on the turn. Our opponent is capped and inelastic. Now the flush comes in on the river, and this is not the spot where I want to run the big boy bluff. And the reason is our opponent just has a lot of flushes. They have a lot of straights getting to the river. So this size here, in my opinion, is just not going to be profitable because our opponent's going to be uncapped. We're just going to run into a brick wall, probably a little bit too much on this river. So my adjustment on this river, we always got to be thinking, what is our opponent's range? It's probably going to be some flushes, some straights, and then a lot of Jack X. So my question would be, if we did have a hand, like let's say we had a queen high flush and our opponent flipped over a hand like king jack or jack 9 or something like that, what size are we going with our king high flush to try to get Jack X to call us? Probably not all in, because the flush has come in, the straight draw has come in. Jack X is probably not calling it all in. So what size would we go to get Jack X to call on this river when everything has gotten there? I don't know, maybe half pot, 200, 250, something like that. Because if we go any bigger, the Jack X is folding. So what does that mean when we have a bluff here? We just go slightly bigger than that, maybe 300, maybe 350. And sure, we're going to get snapped off by the flushes and the straights here, but we're getting a pretty nice price to get all of the Jack X, and our opponent should have a ton of Jack X from the big blind here. All the offsuit, ace Jack, king Jack, queen Jack, right? All the suited Jack 9, Jack 8, right? Our opponent's gonna have a ton of Jack X here, and we're just getting a pretty damn good price. Remember, always ask that inverse question on the river. If I had value here, what size would I go to get Jack X to call? And all of a sudden that whole forest of possibilities opens up for us. Now we can see a really nice bluff size on this river to get Jack X to fold, maybe 300. Something in that ballpark, and all of a sudden this bluff that was a punt starts to turn back into the more profitable size when we are much more particular with our sizing. All right, so we looked at this spot when we had value. I want to look at it from the inverse spot. So our opponent opens under the gun. We're gonna flat on the button here. We flop an open ender. Our opponent pots. Remember, we saw this earlier, and now on the turn our opponent pots again, and we are going to call in position, and now our opponent checks. So this is a spot we talked about earlier. Opponents on this river, especially recreational players, when they check on this river after betting big on the flop and betting big on the turn, their range is just too strong. And in general, if we want our opponent to fold strong hands, we need to tell them twice in no uncertain terms that we have a very good hand. One bet is not going to do it, even if we choose an egregiously large size. They're checking to check call here. Doesn't matter if we put all the chips in. So the adjustment I like to make in this spot is, sure, probably don't want to give up with queen high. Probably, we're winning 0 if we just check back in this spot. We're winning $0 of this $377 pot. So maybe on this river, instead of choosing the all-in size here, once again, pretty decent spot to just choose the scalpel here. And I know we talked about earlier, maybe our opponent is just heavily weighted towards value when they take this line, but sure, they could still have some really big draws here. Ace 10 of clubs, ace queen of clubs, queen X of clubs, ace 4 of clubs, right? They can just have quite a few big draws, combo draws that would bet big on the flop, bet big on the turn, and then check on the river. So seems like a pretty good spot to just try to get that stuff to fold. And if we can do that when we have queen high, we're just once again going to have a very, very profitable bluff. Sure, we're gonna get snapped off here by aces, ace king a lot of the time, but we're getting a really, really nice cheap price. And you're seeing a pattern here a lot of the times when the big boy bluff is going to be a punt, when the jackhammer is just going to lose a bunch of money, the scalpel is going to come to the rescue. All right, next one, and this is a good one. This is one of my favorites. So scribble this one down on your little notepad. All right, so we're gonna open king queen of clubs, and the cutoff button is gonna 3-bet. We're gonna say this is a player who's a little bit more on the aggressive side, and I like to 4-bet linear out of position. They're gonna be 3-betting hands like king jack, king 10, queen jack, queen 9 suited. I just don't think when our opponents are in position, they're going to be folding at the correct frequency. They're just gonna call too much in position after they 3-bet. So I like to go really linear here. This may be the bottom of my linear range. What do I mean when I say a linear range? I just mean good, better, best, right? I'm gonna be 4-betting hands, cutoff versus button. Hands like king queen suited, ace queen suited, pocket 10s, pocket jacks, ace jack suited, just all of my very, very good hands, but I'm gonna go a little bit wider and a little bit more thin for value. I'm not gonna have bluffs here, right? I'm not gonna be 4-betting hands like ace 5 suited because I believe my opponents are going to be calling too much, right? If my opponents aren't going to fold a hand like ace 10 suited, why would I 4-bet a hand like ace 5 suited in the spot? Instead, I'd rather have ace jack, ace queen suited. It just makes a lot more sense. Now, against super passive players, against OMCs, right, this 4-bet is going to be a punt, but against aggressive players, and particularly in today's game, players are 3-betting their buttons just a lot more. And in general, they're just not going to fold enough once they 3-bet. So if our opponents are calling with hands like 10-9 suited, queen jack suited, king 10 suited to a 4-bet, which I believe a lot of them are when they're in position and deep, the way we punish them is just by out-handing them. So that's what we want to do here. And a conundrum I see players run into all the time here. Ace high board, 4-bet pot, pre-flop raiser. Well, what do we do here? We go quarter pot, we go 1/3 pot. The problem is, once our opponent calls, what is their range? Because once we use this 1/3 pot size, this quarter pot size, our opponents are probably going to start folding hands like pocket jacks, pocket 10s, king jack suited here. So what is our opponent's range once they call this bet? Well, it's probably going to be hands like ace king, ace queen, ace jack, right? It's going to be a lot of ace X. It's going to be pretty much primarily only ace X. So the problem is we're not going to have a profitable bluff across turns and rivers, and we may just have to give up here and check fold on the turn. So how do we make this more profitable? How do we turn this back into a profitable bluffing spot? So same situation, except now what happens if we go 10% pot? Very, very small. And Yeah, our opponents aren't going to fast play. I'm not saying they're going to fast play here, but the nice part about choosing this small size is our opponents are now going to float the flop with a lot more hands. Maybe king jack of hearts floats here now. Maybe a hand like pocket tens, pocket jacks, pocket queens. Maybe these hands just call all the time to a 10% pot size bet. So what's going to happen? Yeah, we're not just going to blindly triple barrel blast here, right? But what's going to happen if we check the turn and our opponent checks back, we're just going to have a very profitable bluff opportunity on rivers. We don't need to go big here. All we need to do is get hands like kings, queens, jacks, tens to fold. We don't need to go huge to do that. Our line looks quite credible that we could have ace X here. So what size would we choose on this river if we had a hand like ace jack and we're trying to get pocket tens to call on this river? We probably have to go really small on this river, maybe 150, maybe 200. We have to go relatively small. So if we go 300 here, when we have king high, what are hands like tens, jacks, queens, kings going to do on the river? They are going to fold. The cool part is going back to the turn, what's our opponent going to do when they do have a hand like ace king on this turn is they're mostly just going to bet. So not saying our opponent never has ace X getting to the river, but we can reduce those combos, right? And because we bet so small on the flop, it keeps our opponent's range wider and weaker. They're just gonna have a lot of hands that would fold on this river if we start breathing on this pot. All right, guys, if you wanna start recognizing these spots yourself, let's say you see a player in your game and you're like, well, I know this guy's a little bit trappy. I know he calls a little bit too much. If you wanna be able to put those pieces together and build a plan to exploit the exact players you're playing against every day, that is what our 5-day Basecamp was built for. So if that at all sounds interesting, highly recommend you check it out. Either way, hope this video turns you into the biggest boy possible. Thank you guys and have a gentle day.